I am joined by my friend Richard Scott. Hello, Richard.
Andy, I was just commenting on your lovely blue T-shirt advertising Pure Men's Mag, and yeah, you look good in it.
I think so. Actually, my wife at the moment has been taking to wearing her magazine that she got. It was a pre-order. So people who pre-ordered the very, very first edition of Pure Media, the magazine, which came out on the 1st of May, she was one of the very, very first people who actually got the subscription. So she now has a T-shirt, which were they were very limited. There's no more ever.
Very good. It'll be like a classic car in 50 years' time. So.
Well, I think so. It's cotton, so it should last ages. Now, I suppose, having a little bit of fun at your expense earlier, which I think I can get away with, because I was talking about the reason why I know I've had this joke. It's not new, but I had the joke about the fact we can't read doctors' writings, probably because they reduce things like medicine, which is 3 syllables, down to medicine, which is 2. And I think that's why doctors couldn't read. But it got me thinking about how we communicate in certain careers and how they might approach sort of things. And actually, it's good to have some difference. But my wife handed me something she wrote that she couldn't read. And I can. I'm not sure what that says, 30 years of marriage probably, but I just thought it was quite amusing that some of the things that we can't read.
Yeah. Well, doctors specialise, although it'll all be different now because, young doctors just use computers. They probably won't know how to write soon.
No, what's a pen for? What does that do? Right, so we talk about all things medicine, topical questions, everything that comes up. So, have you got a topic for us tonight, sir?
There we are, joshing about what's a pen for. So I'm going to pose the question: what's a fork for? There's brain injury is the topic tonight. We've talked a bit in the past about brains and neuroplasticity, but there's been a super article came up this week, and I couldn't resist it. So I thought I must bring it to Andy and the listeners. So just as a sort of prelude, I'm sure if any of the listeners have lived long enough, they will have family or friends who've suffered from some type of brain injury. In my own sort of existence, I can think over the last few years of a friend who had a stroke following a long bike ride. He did the bike ride London to Brighton, got there, and 10 minutes later had a stroke, sadly, from which he's not quite fully recovered. Another one who's, again, not quite fully recovered, having been knocked off his bike by a car and left for dead in an adjacent field. That was shocking, my goodness, but doing well now, I might say. Another good friend of mine who died in Kenya from a motorbike accident, hit on a zebra crossing. And that's even before, years ago. I can think of a medical student just in the year ahead of me, the most lively chap in the year ahead, who someone opened a car door when he was cycling, he went over the top and never regained consciousness. Accidents happen and strokes happen. Of course, meningitis and infections, meningitis, encephalitis can affect our brains catastrophically. To the extent that when we were medical students, we were always advised that very specialised brain tissue wouldn't heal. So you have much less specialised tissue, say muscle tissue. You've got a good chance of healing. But brain tissue, no chance. It would just scar, and little that could be done in those days. Now, I might say over the last 40 years, things have changed a lot. Not least for thromboses in strokes, where you can get there with clot busters early enough, you can make a full recovery, as again another friend of mine has done. So things have been improving, but the picture still can be pretty bleak until recently, and that's where we're up to tonight. Here's the good news. I know I start off with a bit of bad news, but here's the good news. There was an article in the Times this week entitled "A Quiet Revolution in Brain Treatment." And it was celebrating that outcomes for stroke patients have leapt ahead following the discovery that damaged brain tissue can repair itself. And the book associated with this article, this is where my fork came in, is called How to Use a Fork: Stories of Mending the Broken Brain by neurologist Dr. Orlando Swain in England. So I couldn't resist looking at it. How to use a fork. I've got to look at this article. What's it about? And the article starts off, of course, by reminding us, and we've talked about this before, Andy, haven't we, what a fantastic organ the brain is, on top of our shoulders. They describe it as a priceless organic supercomputer. So there we are. That's a nice start. Processing our world. Any idea how many connections are in the brain, Andy? Just chuck out a number.
I was going to say a few billion.
You're well out. 100 trillion. And a trillion being a million. And then another 100 of those. So, yes, 100 trillion connections. And this leads to all the brain functions we can think of: memory, reason, personality, abstract thought. And of course, when it gets damaged, because it's so complex, it was thought to be a lost cause. But what this neurologist has discovered is that brains actually, given a fair wind, have an extraordinary capacity for reorganization and recovery. Now, his interest in brains, excuse me, dated back to medical school when we all used to do dissection. Let me just have a quick glug of my orange juice.
You go for that.
We all used to do anatomical dissection. And he could not believe it when he started to dissect a female brain. And that was where his interest started. He's about, I reckon, 10 to 15 years younger than I am. But even then, he was told that if a brain was damaged, there may be a little initial recovery, but really that's it. You can't mend it after that. So if someone has a bad stroke, they're in a nursing home, all their choices in life are reduced. And in fact, just give them an easy time, TLC, tender loving care, and shield them from too much stimulation or activity. That was the thinking in those days. Now, this neurologist, Swain, is a leading figure at the National Hospital for Neurology in London. He views what he learned in those days as, in his words, nihilistic, just empty, dead. Because over the last 20 years, there's been a quiet revolution in the concept of neuroplasticity, which is the subtle process by which surviving brain tissue, so those brain cells, the neurons that haven't been knocked off by the trauma, whatever it was, surviving brain tissue can, over time, forge new connections and networks. That's neuroplasticity. It's a plastic nature of the neurological tissue. How, of course, is the big question. Well, it's hard work. With repetitive stimulation, this will enable new pathways to form. So stimulation done repetitively, and the brain will be trained like you can train a muscle to work harder. And these new pathways will mean new synapses, which are the connections between the brain cells or the neurons. And he describes it, this is rather nice, a bit like an invisible route through a dense jungle. So there we are. There's a nice thought. He even thinks it's like a neuroscientific thriller. Watching the science unfold, it's startling and it's beautiful. So the book, How to Use a Fork, is full of hope, optimism, but also indignation about the lack of resources, but overall about his life devoted to helping damaged brains, especially with stroke patients. I didn't know actually, but strokes are overall the largest single cause of disability in adults worldwide. I don't know what I would have put it down to. I'm not sure I would have put it down to strokes necessarily, but there we are. I think it might have been trauma or infections, but strokes are the largest cause of disability in adults worldwide. In the UK alone, it costs billions. They cost billions a year in healthcare, long-term dependency and loss of economic activity. So what's needed? Intense intervention from specialists in music, this is nice, speech therapy, exercise, occupational therapy, intensely done, repetitively done, and it drives recovery. Every day, this guy Swain, and this is the encouragement for any of the listeners out there, every day he witnesses patients recovering lost speech, improving memory or concentration, finding new movement in weak limbs, which of course all translates into independence and improved quality of life. Now he says, if rehabilitation were medication, we'd all be buying shares in the company. I thought that was rather nice, especially for head injuries, of which there are 200,000 a year head injuries admitted to UK hospitals, mainly in young, risk-taking men. Now, he quotes some examples. A builder, he mentions falling off a roof, who after multiple surgeries and 9 months of intense rehab, returned home walking and talking. Or a cyclist, I mentioned cyclists earlier, cyclist hit by a van. When he arrived on the ward, he'd been unconscious more than 1 year. Can you imagine it? And they didn't give up on him. 4 years of intensive therapy, after which he could speak and interact with his family. He'd been unconscious. Wow. Neuroplasticity at work. Fantastic, isn't it? So Swain also doesn't like existing ways of categorizing head injuries, by the way, into mild, moderate or severe. It's very crude. So someone might come into a hospital, they seem to have had a mild head injury. They can walk, they can talk, and they're sent home. But cognitive changes can persist. Things can be missed, and it just stores up problems for later. As we see in some of the rugby players that we've had over in the Times a lot recently, You get an invisible disability. Lives begin to fall apart, relationships damaged, alcohol involved. Here's an amazing stat. This is amazing. I think it's amazing. I like numbers. Get this one. There was a study of 8,000 male prisoners in 2025. So right up to date, 8,000 male prisoners. 80%, 80%, had suffered severe head injuries in their lives and then later end up in prison. Another study from Canada of 10,000 homeless people, over 50% had had head injuries preceding homelessness. Look at the damage head injuries do to people. Many of their injuries have been classified as mild. A lack of rehab, Swain says, sets off a ticking time bomb of social and medical problems. Just to finish, neuro rehab is tough. That chap, unconscious for a year, 4 years of rehab. It's grueling to endure, I bet it is. It's expensive to provide, I bet it is. But Swain says he's humbled by the life force within people and families that drives them to fight back after catastrophe. Now, his book's got plenty of science in it. I haven't read it. I've just read a review. His book's got plenty of science in it, but it's packed, this is lovely, with tenderness. For those who struggle in the dark aftermath of brain injury, it brings serious hope and encouragement. We just need NHS resources to catch up.
Yes, which would be a greater challenge. I was thinking about a simple cut. If I have a cut on my arm, I've got access to antiseptic cream. I can stick that on. I can clean it up with some alcohol wash if I really needed to. I can put a plaster on it and I can save it. And it's not really a big issue, a 3 or 4 centimetre cut. It's not the end of the world. I can treat that at home fairly successfully. If I'm in a jungle, a quarter of that all of a sudden is not a mild issue. Now it's a really, really severe issue. So it makes sense even to this non-medically trained individual that actually a brain injury, can you really say that brain damage is mild? I'm not sure that I understand how we get to that place, but a bit like the cut that I can treat at home and the cut you can't treat in the jungle that's more serious, actually brain injury, it's quite a big deal.
Yes. And I think he's obviously campaigning to get rid of these crude markers and actually have much more detail before you send someone home. And if you do say, okay, you don't need to stay in hospital, but you need some intense follow-up, and we're going to absolutely make sure there aren't long-term problems, that's what's needed. Of course, it's resource intensive. Yeah, and there's wars going on and there's all the cost of living crisis. No one says it's easy, but of course, like anybody else, he wants money to come into his field. And what is more important than the brain? Well, some might say the heart, because if your heart doesn't work, then your brain has got no chance. But, alongside the heart, the brain is enormously important. And I think with the rugby injuries and even some of the football injuries from repetitive heading that we're seeing, it's an invisible, slow ticking time bomb, as he describes. We need to do better with head injuries.
I would agree. I don't know much about head injuries. I've never really had much of one. I've banged my head a few times maybe in the past, not really thought much of it. But I don't do well stubbing my toe. That one for me is one of those things that I'm out for an hour. I'm just in a bad place because we're all going to have a different tolerance. My wife walks into a door. It's much worse than me walking into a door. Sorry if I do it. It's just one of those things. There are other things that I'm better at than she is. And so that's just two people and we can deal with stuff differently. But with brain injuries, it's such a hard one because I mean, if you fall over and you break your arm, it goes in a cast, it gets stuck in a position for so long, we allow the bones to heal, and then you get your arm back, and it doesn't work straight away because you need physiotherapy of some form to get it moving again, because now it's stiff, and you need to build the muscles back up, and all that stuff has to happen. But with the brain, it's not quite as simple as just breaking out, some weights. You can't do that with your head.
I mean, I think what I was encouraged by, obviously you want to get people right from the beginning with brain injury because then you can reduce the damage that's done. But that chap who'd been unconscious for a year and still made a considerable improvement. Wow. It took 4 years, but we just shouldn't write people off, which is what has happened with strokes and brain injuries in the past, other forms of brain injury in the past, because people thought nothing could be done. Well, it can. How to use a fork, I hope, will make good reading and be part of medical school teaching in the future.
But I mean, medicine changes, science changes. This one is a bit of a particular passion of mine. I get a bit of a soapbox. I get really irritated with science as fact because science is looking at things and discovering it's not true anymore. Now we've got something else to do. And it really, really bugged me during COVID in particular. I'm going to be careful how I say this, but some of the facts were not. And it really annoys me when facts are presented as facts that are actually just a theory that's been tested that could change, like with the brain stuff, okay, you can't heal it. Oh, yes, you can now. Well, it's very, very careful and important that scientists never say you can't. What they need to say is, well, we can't at the moment, but maybe you can. So let's keep looking.
This is where we're at. This is our best understanding at present. And I think humble people and the best scientists are humble scientists because they want to do better. And, and also the best ones are the ones who say, look, we're really not very good at this at the moment, but we're going to try harder. And then they'll take the public with them.
I know we've talked about money before. We looked at the meningitis outbreak and all the students saying, we want to get inoculated and all that sort of stuff and vaccines or all that. But of course it's very expensive. So then doctors and scientists have to say, well, if it's 100 people and it's £1, not so bad. If it's 100 people and it's £1 million, well, we probably physically can't do that. So it does come back to money far too frequently. And I understand that because people need to be paid wages and research is expensive. It just is. Can we research this thing? Yep. No, on we're going and that failed. On to the next one. It's really expensive because most of it's complete failure. But every so often that failure, it becomes penicillin.
Well, the number I was taught as a young GP was that for every successful drug that comes out, it's cost between £200 and £300 million in terms of research and development and the failures along the way. It's enormous. So no wonder drug companies want to make their money. Whether it's a statin or Viagra or a heart drug, because it's such an expensive business.
And it is because there's a lot of failure. There's a lot of try and error. It's generating things that didn't exist, which is why science and understanding, is it working? Is there a better way? Is it not working? Okay. Can we replicate it? The basics of science. And, I'm fascinated by the brain stuff only because it's one of those where I think a lot of people think, well, the brain's pretty complicated, but we'll just sort of leave it and ignore it. We can't see it. Therefore it's not a problem, but it's up here somewhere and it's, it kind of matters.
Well, I think with all the rugby injuries, it's really forcing people's hand to say we need to take this more seriously. This book will contribute. I'm quite sure. I mean, he's passionate, but then you might say, well, other people in other spheres of medicine are passionate as well. Of course they are. You want to see your area done well, but it's just so important with the brains. And we really did write people off in the past, but now we know better, so we need to do better.
We do. Dare I ask you about boxing? If rugby's not great for you, what does boxing really do to the head?
Muhammad Ali was a good example, wasn't he? Parkinson's through repetitive trauma. Yeah, it's. I'm amazed that more boxers on vegetables, to be honest, because that is the ultimate repetitive head injury, isn't it? Wow. And I think I might have told you that it was really fun. We had a kid round. He was banging a football in my garden. He was very good. He was only 6. He was around a few weeks ago, and I said to him, "Well, look, you're so good. You kick the ball onto and I'll head it in." You see, that we're just having a game, and then I said, "Let's turn it around." He said, "No, I'm not allowed to head the ball till I'm 8, and it's a national rule." I was completely unaware of it, but they're now taking things seriously. Not even a softball in a garden. It's not a proper football game, but no, I'm not doing it. Right, fine, okay, that's the rule. In that case, keep putting it on my head. But how interesting! At least that's a way forward.
But the thing is, there's so often so much we can do. Yes, we've got to address the cotton wool issue, I suppose, of are we mollycoddling people too often? Well, yes, to some extent, I think we probably are. I know we've talked about some of the neurodivergent stuff that's coming around. I know we've talked about some conditions where is it really a problem? There's a very interesting article in either July or August Pure Media, the magazine, about anxiety and bad backs. I'm just going to prep this and say it's written by a proper psychiatrist or a psychologist. I forget which. It's terrible. I can't remember. One of the two specialties. But she's writing about, is anxiety the new bad back? And it's really interesting.
I think I know where it's going and I'm with her. But let's read the article first.
Let's read the article. Yeah, I've edited it now. It's in the magazine for July. But there are some things where we need to be a bit more risky. I think risky is good. I don't think it's a male thing. It's interesting about the men in prisons. Is it 80%, you said?
80%. Well, in that study of 8,000. So it's not an enormous study, but 8,000 is still a reasonable study.
That's still pretty good of a particular cross section of society, and it does then see I like to problem solve. That's kind of one of my things I do all the time. I want to problem solve and say, okay, what's that leading to? How many people outside of prison have got that sort of level of brain damage or brain injury? Is this exclusive to prisoners? So is this more medically related crime? Because that's where my brain wants to start to investigate.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think crime is still crime, but it can be contributed to by brain injury. Sure.
I'm all for this guy. We're trying to push medicine forward.
How to use a fork.
I love it because I'm sitting there holding a pen without thinking much about it. But, my brain I'm not thinking particularly that I've got a pen in my hand. I can write without looking at the page to a point. Otherwise it looks like doctors writing. No. But we can do certain things which we're quite clever at. But I think I've shared this before. I'm going to bring it back again because do you remember Body Matters on the BBC years and years ago? And they were looking at the capacity of the brain. And I know I'm going to get this wrong, but something like 10 to 15% is how much of our brain capacity the ordinary person use. You're talking about a trillion plus. I mean, it's monopoly money, isn't it? Let's be honest. Number of connections.
Yes.
But they were saying how little of the brain we actually utilize. I mean, you talk about a supercomputer.
In those days, I think it was, even less than that. Perhaps it was 8%, the number I remember. But it's partly because we didn't understand what the other 92% did. All of our brain. But I think as understanding increases, we'll learn that we're using more than just 8%. But there's a lot of stuff that doesn't seem to be useful. But how much of that is ignorance on our part, and how much of it is literally a dead weight, I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you this one now. Autonomic parts of the body. I only know this because when I tried to be a paramedic, I was asked about the autonomic responses and I had to learn a whole bunch of stuff that I don't remember, apart from autonomic responses. Does the brain, is it doing it in the background?
No, it's a completely different system.
I told you.
The autonomic nervous system and the no, it's a very different nervous system. So yeah, that's a whole subject in itself.
Aren't you glad I didn't become a paramedic? Right, Richard, thank you. I've really enjoyed that one because anything that can make lives better is a good thing. It reminds me just how phenomenally well made we are. God didn't just chuck us together. You can be unconscious for a year, and then with some intensive work, you can do meaningful stuff again.
Yeah, and I think this program is about hope. Yes, there's some bad stuff along the way. Well, the reason you need hope is because life can be tough, and Christianity is about hope on the background of mankind turning away from God. And hope has got to be there. And when there is hope, whether it's medical, physical, psychological, spiritual, it's worth celebrating, isn't it? Mm.
I will share this with you because I was having a bit of a rough morning. Nothing really bad, just looking around the world and thinking, seriously, I think the phrase I used that somebody picked up on was, I read someone's post on something and it was it was as dumb as a bucket of shrimp, but that's an insult to shrimps. Because some of the stuff I'm seeing,
that one.
There you go. It's an Andy B special for you. So I was just thinking, what is wrong with people? Can you just engage the brain and shut the mouth and think before you start typing, your keyboard warrior kind of thing. But I was thinking about how much stress there is in the world, and it's quite a scary place if you look around. And I was just not feeling stressed, but just down, sad, heavy at the world. And I just saw this finch, little tiny, but it wasn't even a pretty one. It just landed on a branch and then flew off again, and it caught my attention. And then I saw a rabbit that jumped into the garden, started bounding away from me up the garden, and got very clearly excited by some fresh grass. And then we saw two woodpeckers land on the floor, obviously a pair, and they started pecking for food. And this was in the space of about 10 minutes. And what struck me was all this stuff in the world that is anxiety creating, fear, construction, and all that kind of stuff. Just seeing that bird and remembering a bit of scripture that says, the birds of the fields, I'm going to paraphrase terribly. The birds of the field, God gives them what they need. They have the food. They don't have to worry about the clothes they wear. They just get on. And having watched these 3 successive sets of animals just going about the day, they're not worried about the, stuff in the world. They're just getting on with eating and doing what they do. And it gave me such a sense of peace and hope to remember that God is in control. And if you're looking stressed around the world, stop looking at the bad stuff. Start looking at something good. Find some nature. Because it's really good.
Yeah. Amen.
There you go. Dr. Richard Scott, sir, thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Here at Pure 247 Radio, we've had the privilege of speaking to some amazing people with some amazing stories.
I was about 5k off the coast paddling, and I was watching this storm on the land, and it literally hit a mountain. And rather than just going over the top of it, just turned and just came straight at me. You can't stay on the board in that instance, so I literally am jumping off the back of the board. I've got everything tethered down on the board. I'm just holding on to the back of the board.
As I walked in, there was a fight going on the floor. There was a police sergeant sailing over the desk to help with restraining somebody. And the doors were clanging shut, all the big metal gates, and there were alarms going off and radios. And I felt this most enormous peace come over me, because I realised that this is where God wanted me to spend my career behind bars.
It was like a baptism of fire, and it was like the most socially deprived council wards in Britain. And then we were going into schools, and then kids were coming to the gigs, but then knocking on my door at night, and I was out there playing football till 11:30 p.m. at night, 12 o'clock, feeding kids, running youth clubs.
If you've missed an inspiring conversation and want to catch up, or you'd like to revisit a brilliant interview, you can. Our interviews are available on YouTube and podcast, so you can always catch up anytime you like. Search for Pure 247 Radio wherever you get your podcasts, or find our YouTube channel at Pure 247 Radio, or head over to www.pure247radio.org/catch up.